Let's dive right into the frozen mystery of Kvitøya and the 1897 Andrée Expedition. Picture this. It's the summer of 1930, and the Arctic is experiencing this unusually warm season. The heat has actually melted away the thick, impenetrable ice and fog that normally completely shrouds a desolate, rocky outpost known as Kvitøya, or White Island. So a Norwegian sealing ship called the Bråtvåg decides to take advantage of these super rare conditions and go ashore. But, the sailors aren't just looking for freshwater or walruses. Stumbling across that barren, sandy shore, they make an absolutely chilling discovery. Emerging right out of the melting snow is a makeshift boat, a frozen campsite, and human remains. After 33 years of total silence, the world had finally found the missing men of the doomed 1897 Andrée Expedition.
But here's the thing. What they actually found at that campsite didn't answer questions. It just created a terrifying new mystery. Look at this haunting contradiction. We have the final, coherent written words of the expedition's leader, Salomon August Andrée. He writes, "Morale remains good. With such comrades as these, one ought to be able to manage under practically any circumstances whatsoever." So optimistic, right? Yet within days of writing that entry, all 3 men on the expedition would be dead.
I want you to treat this explainer like a cold case investigation, because honestly, that is exactly what it is. Looking closely at this sketch map of the camp discovered by the Bråtvåg crew, you start to notice things. When investigators and sailors examined the area, they didn't find a scene of desperate struggle or chaos. Not at all. Instead, they found an eerie, completely undisturbed campsite. They found human remains laid out with peculiar care and a diary carefully wrapped up in a woolen sweater for protection. So to understand how they ended up on this desolate shore in such a macabre setup, we have to flash back 33 years.
Back in 1897, Andrée, who was a Swedish engineer, somehow convinced his nation that he could conquer the North Pole by simply floating over it. Talk about staggering hubris. The massive hydrogen balloon, called the Eagle, was delivered directly to the Arctic without ever being fully tested. And worse, Andrée's steering mechanism, which was this system of heavy drag ropes, was deeply flawed. Literally within minutes of taking off in July 1897, those ropes dragged in the water, tore away, and stripped the balloon of hundreds of kilograms of essential weight. So this supposedly steerable craft instantly became a helpless little bubble at the mercy of the Arctic winds, and it crashed right onto the pack ice just 2.5 days later.
Suddenly, you've got 3 indoor academics, Andrée, meteorologist Knut Frænkel, and young physicist Nils Strindberg, stranded on shifting pack ice hundreds of miles from anywhere. And look at what they packed: silk scarves and cravats, monogrammed handkerchiefs, fine elk skin gloves, and embroidered towels. Imagine facing the primal, unforgiving reality of the Arctic ice in damp woolen suits instead of survival furs. They had essentially transferred a bourgeois 19th century drawing room straight into a balloon basket. They had literally planned to step out of their balloon and back into civilization looking like proper, polished gentlemen.
The sensory nightmare these men endured out there is almost unimaginable. Try to picture the visceral discomfort of constantly wearing wet wool in sub-zero temperatures, the relentless, bitter winds howling around you, and the absolutely rancid smell of the half-cooked polar bear meat they had to hunt and eat just to survive. They were dragging sledges that weighed over 130 kilograms each, hauling them over towering, jagged ridges of ice. Yet right in the middle of this frozen hell, we find these incredibly poignant artifacts, like this shorthand letter written by young Nils Strindberg to his fiancée Anna. It's this beautifully penned love letter written by a man slowly realizing he might never actually see his home again. Let's look at the timeline of this march across a frozen hell. On July 14th, the balloon crash lands. By August 4th, they change course, heading for 7 islands. For months, they dragged those backbreaking sledges, trying desperately to reach supply depots. But here's the worst part. The ocean currents were literally drifting the ice backward, completely erasing their agonizing daily progress. So by September 12th, they finally surrendered to the drift, and they built a snow hut right on top of the pack ice to wait out the winter. But of course, the Arctic wasn't done with them. On October 2nd, the ice floe suddenly cracks and breaks apart directly underneath their hut as it collides with the shores of Kvitøya. They scramble to get their gear onto solid land. And then, on October 17th, we get the absolute final diary notation from Strindberg. Just a single cryptic note reading, "Home, 7:30 a.m."
Now, when they finally hit the desolate shores of Kvitøya, they didn't just collapse in the snow. As you can see from the topography of the campsite,
They were physically capable enough to haul their heavy gear 350 meters up the beach. They chose this spot very specifically because it was a well-drained, sandy area, shielded from the brutal winds by a 3-meter-high rock outcrop.
So they have a solid working shelter. But this is where the forensic contradictions start to escalate, building this profound sense of dread. Fact number 1. They had dry driftwood. Piles of it had actually been gathered, meaning they had ample materials right within arm's reach to make a warming fire.
Fact number 2. They had a working Primus stove. When the investigators found it in 1930, it was turned off and there was still kerosene inside the tank. That is crucial. They did not freeze to death because they ran out of fuel. They could have easily created heat.
Fact number 3. They had food. Kvitøya is a prime hunting ground. They had massive amounts of harvested meat laying right alongside remaining balloon provisions and sealed tins. Plus, they had rifles and ammunition.
Yet, despite having adequate food, a working shelter, and being physically capable of surviving the trek up the beach, all 3 men perished within days. This completely unresolved nightmare is what the Bråtvåg crew walked into in 1930.
The sequence of their deaths provides a really haunting clue. Nils Strindberg, the youngest, died first. We know this for a fact because his companions hastily wedged his body into a rocky cleft under layers of stone. But Andrée and Frænkel, they were left totally unburied. Frænkel was found inside the tent, while Andrée was found just outside. So whatever happened to those remaining 2 men, it was sudden, and it was catastrophic. It was a collapse so incredibly fast or so totally debilitating that they couldn't even bury their own dead.
Now, look at the interior arrangement of this final camp. Sleeping bags are laid out. Personal effects are neatly folded beside them. There's absolutely no sign of struggle, no injury, and like we mentioned, fire-making materials were within reach but unused. A sealed annex of the Swedish Society of Anthropology inquiry actually noted that this matched no known pattern of cold weather death. And it gets eerier. The final diary entry, which is now held at the Swedish National Archives under the Andrée Expedition Collection, chillingly describes the men deciding to sleep earlier than usual on a night when temperatures were entirely survivable. The inquiry's medical examiner underlined this specific phrasing, and he added a single, haunting marginal note that no subsequent analysis has ever fully addressed. He just wrote, "Voluntary?"
Let's quickly run through the main forensic theories because, as you'll see, every single one has a glaring hole. Trichinosis from undercooked bear meat? Well, other explorers survived on that exact diet for over a year with 0 issues. A modern medical toxicologist strongly suggests botulism from poorly heated canned food or frozen seal meat, which would explain a sudden, paralyzing death within 36 hours. Others point to a polar bear attack, noting some damage to Strindberg's clothes, but that doesn't explain the totally uninjured bodies of the other 2 men. And finally, that's suicide theory. Left alone, facing a dark, brutal winter, did Andrée consume their ample supply of morphine and deliberately go to sleep? But here is the most frustrating twist in this entire cold case. We will probably never know for sure. When the bodies were brought back to Sweden in 1930 for this massive state funeral, the autopsies were a total, absolute disaster. Performed hastily in the middle of the night, the pathologists introduced absurd errors into the official record. They noted 4 left arms for 3 bodies. Crucially, 0 tissue samples were taken to test for botulism, lead, or morphine. The bodies were immediately cremated, which permanently destroyed the exact physical evidence that could solve the mystery for us today. So the Andrée expedition leaves us with this heavy, haunting silence. We have all their gear, their beautifully exposed photographs, and their poignant diaries, all perfectly preserved in the ice. Yet the ultimate cause of their demise is just slightly out of reach. Was it a microscopic toxin lurking in an airtight can? Was it a sudden, brutal intervention by the wildlife? Or did they, sitting there by a pile of unlit driftwood with fuel still in their stove, deliberately decide to sleep earlier than usual, making a terrifying voluntary choice to just surrender? It's a mystery that leaves us staring straight into the sheer indifferent power of nature. Think about that for a second, and I'll see you in the next explainer.